Boys, gather round. They're stringing up Watson in an hour or so. Let's go down there and get ourselves some justice. What do you say, boys? Here, let's hear. Listen here, executioner. You better go on and get. We will take it from here. Well, I have a job. I said go on and get. We gonna string you up ourselves, Watson, you son of a bitch. But first, we gonna have some fun with you.
Damn right we will.
That's enough. This is my criminal, and there ain't a damn person that's gonna touch him.
What the hell are you gonna do about it, Bullock? There's a lot more of us than there is of you.
You better stay back. Now. Take one more damn step and I'll blow a hole through your chest. I'm stringing him up myself.
Reminder, the story you just heard is fictional. It is a legend story based off of true events. Howdy, and welcome back to Wild West Deep Dives. This is part 1 of our deep dive series on Seth Bullock. Seth Bullock was one of the most famous characters of the Wild West. He was many things: lawman, entrepreneur, husband, father, and pioneer. This episode we are going to talk about his childhood, his time in Montana, and his arrival in Deadwood. Well, let's get into it, shall we? My name's Steven, and this is Wild West Deep Dives. Seth Bullock was born in Amherst, Ontario, Canada, on July 23, 1849, to parents George and Agnes Finley. He was the 6th of 8 children. When Seth was 5, the family moved to Sandwich, Ontario, once his father became involved in politics. Here's some info on his parents. George Bullock was born on March 31, 1806, in England. He was a sergeant in the British Army. He was a strict disciplinary, probably because of his military background. His mother, Agnes Finley, was born in 1817 in Scotland, and she was the complete opposite. She was a sweet-natured Scotchwoman. However, in 1860, George Bullock was forced to resign his position of county treasurer because of missing funds. To avoid getting arrested, George Bullock fled to Detroit, Michigan, leaving his wife and 8 children behind. The Western legend story goes, after George fled Canada, his mother, Agnes Finley, died in 1860. Therefore, the children were left to care for themselves, and their home and their property were either sold at public auction or seized by his creditors in 1863. There are 0 reports of Agnes's death, as I couldn't find a death certificate, but it's generally believed that she died in 1860. There isn't much info of how, but it seems the Bullock children made their way down to Detroit to live with their father. Eventually, 13-year-old Seth Bullock had had enough of his father's restrictions and decided to run away from home. He went to his sister's place that was also in Michigan. She had married a United States Army officer, but unfortunately for Bullock, his sister sent him back home. He would soon flee again at the age of 16 to try and join the Union Army during the Civil War. But despite many attempts, he was rejected because of his age. After this, Bullock acquired an education, an appreciation for finer literature, a dry sense of humor, and a taste for a strong drink. From a young age, Bullock was willing to take chances. He developed strong opinions and a firm personality. He then began to befriend like-minded people and those he saw as his equals, people who were strong in their beliefs, people willing to take a chance. This turned Bullock into a confident adult. He learned to never back down from a challenge. When his family moved to Michigan, he was able to acquire U.S. citizenship, which was important for him when his political career started. He also met a woman named Martha Eccles. She was born in September 1849 in Ohio. She was the first of 6 children. She was a school teacher in Tecumseh. Well, you could say they fell in love with each other, as they were together for the remainder of their lives. Once Seth turned 18, he left home for good. He arrived in Helena, Montana sometime in 1867. He quickly got into politics and ran for territorial legislator, but unfortunately, he was defeated. He didn't let it keep him down for long though. He got himself elected as a member of the territorial senate. He served this position from 1871 to 1872 and was part of the creation of the United States' first national park, Yellowstone. How much he had to do with the creation of the park is unknown. That being said, it shows that he was passionate about conservation and he understood the importance of it. In 1873, he ran for sheriff of Lewis and Clark County, where he was elected. This was his first bit in law enforcement. During this time, he was attempting to arrest a man named Sel Watson. Watson had stolen a horse and was a known horse thief. During the attempted arrest, Bullock and Watson had a shootout. Bullock was slightly wounded, but Bullock did manage to take Watson into custody. Watson received the sentence of death by hanging. This is the story I told at the beginning of the episode. Here are the facts. When it came time to hang Watson, a mob appeared to take matters into their own hands. They proceeded to scare off the executioner, and just then, Bullock climbed the scaffold, leveling a shotgun towards the mob, stopping them in their tracks. Bullock then pulled the lever, dropping Watson to his death. This event was famously displayed in HBO's TV series, Deadwood, which I will go into at the end of the series. But did this really happen, or was it Hollywood being Hollywood? The answer is yes, it did. Reports may differ whether it was on the scaffold or the post office, but the facts are that Bullock did hold off the mob with a shotgun and strung Watson up himself. Here are some other reports of Bullock's time as sheriff. From the Daily Independent on April 15, 1874. Quote, "A well-conceived attempt to break jail was frustrated yesterday morning by the vigilance of Sheriff Bullock." From the same paper, on July 3, 1874, I'm going to paraphrase because it was a bit confusing with how it was written. "Yesterday afternoon, Sheriff Bullock sent a prisoner by the name of Jimmy Phillips back to custody with a new charge of petit larceny because of a bucket of water." Bullock had sent Jimmy Phillips to go fill up a bucket of water, then come back. Noticing that he was gone longer than was necessary, Bullock stepped out of the jail to see what had become of the prisoner. He, Jimmy Phillips, however, made his appearance in a moment or two. But Jesse Armitick's store was nearby, and he soon noticed that he was missing some money out of the drawer. He communicated the fact to Sheriff Seth Bullock, who proceeded to search the prisoner and found it upon him. This may be considered one of the sharpest tricks ever played by a prisoner in the country. While the bucket of water was being filled, he stepped into the store and robbed the drawer of its contents, so quietly and quickly that he was not detected in the act. He then got his bucket of water and returned to the jail. Obviously this isn't a shootout type Lawman story, but I thought it was an interesting incident. Although Bullock never killed a man while serving as Lawrence County Sheriff, it didn't seem he needed to, in order to uphold the law. According to his grandson, he could outstare a mad cobra or a rogue elephant, which was generally enough to convince the rowdy elements of the town to settle down before any violence took place. Bullock was not only a lawman, he also worked as an auctioneer and began his entrepreneurial career. This is when he met a man by the name of Solomon Starr, more famously known as Sol Starr. He was born on December 20th, 1840, in Bavaria, which is just southeast of Germany for those like me who had no idea where it was. When Sol was 10 years old, he was sent to the state of Ohio to live with his uncle, Joseph Friedlander, who was a garment merchant and ran a business where Sol worked until 1857. When the Civil War broke out, he went down to Missouri, where he worked in the retail business. He headed to Montana and opened up a store in 1865. Then in 1872, he was appointed by President Grant to be the receiver of the land office at Helena, Montana. This is where he met Seth Bullock. They struck up a strong friendship and a strong partnership. Together, they opened a hardware store in Helena in 1873. Then in 1874, Bullock and his sweetheart, Martha Eccles, got married in Salt Lake City, Utah. I was kind of surprised by them getting married in Salt Lake City, but it does appear to be accurate as multiple sources report that. Then in August of 1875, they had their first child, a daughter named Margaret. Soon, the partnership of Solstar and Seth Bullock decided to branch out for a new opportunity outside of Montana. The business partners decided to take a chance and head to a gold mining town that had struck up in the Black Hills region of Dakota Territory, called Deadwood. Bullock did not want to take his wife and young daughter to a rough and tumble mining town and sent them back home to Michigan to live with their parents. According to the book Seth Bullock, Black Hills Lawman by David A. Wolf, that was an excellent source, and I will be quoting it many times. He tells the story of Martha and Margaret's trip back home to Michigan. Quote, "They caught a Missouri River steamboat 130 miles northeast of Helena at Fort Benton. When they reached the Cheyenne River Agency in Dakota Territory, Lakota warriors, apparently agitated over the Black Hills gold rush, boarded the boat, walked throughout, peered into the cabin windows, but did no harm. This brush with danger impressed Martha enough that all her family heard the story, and it was included in her obituary 63 years later. After that incident, the rest of the trip to Michigan was quiet, and Martha waited there for her husband to send for her once again. Ironically, Seth Bullock had an adventure of his own on his way to Deadwood. According to an account by a Butte miner in a retelling on June 27, 1876, quote, "On the afternoon of the 21st, while Solstar and Seth Bullock were en route for Benton by private convoy, and while attempting to ford the Prickly Pear, they were met with an accident which nearly resulted in the loss of their lives. It appears that their team had reached the middle of the stream. The horses became frightened at some floating brush and bolted downstream. Below the ford, the water was deep and the current swift. After strenuous efforts, they succeeded in getting the horses and buggy out all right, but on the same side of the stream they started from. Regardless of this troubling event, they arrived in Deadwood on August 1st, 1876, in wagons filled with hardware goods, shovels, dynamite, picks, pans, cooking utensils, and much more. They parked their wagon on the muddy main street and proceeded to start selling their wares. This will serve as a sort of timeline of the history of the Black Hills and the creation of Deadwood. The first ever recorded mention of Europeans in the mountains west of the Missouri River was in 1743. The Black Hills were seen by the Verentry Party, who were looking for various types of trading opportunities for France. At the time, they had been trading with the Mandan, but wanted to explore westward. They mentioned snow-capped mountains in their journal entries in January of 1743, though when they got back from their journey, nobody believed them. Then on April 30th, 1803, the United States completed the Louisiana Purchase with France for $15 million, about $416 million today, and the Black Hills were located in the northern part of the territory. If that sounds cheap, that's because it was. It was undiscovered territory at the time, and little was known about it. The United States purchased 828,000 square miles of land at roughly 4 cents per acre. At this time, it was widely believed that there was a quote-unquote great river that connected the east to the west. And what I wouldn't do for good land priced at 4 cents an acre. On May 14, 1804, the William and Clark expedition started their trip west after being commissioned by President Thomas Jefferson to explore the new purchase. Then in the summer of 1804, the expedition encountered a man at the mouth of the Cheyenne River named John Vall, who was a local trader who mentioned the Black Mountains, where he had spent some time trapping. A group led by Wilson Hunt passed the Black Mountains and saw them from afar in 1811. The first American people who documented their visit to the Black Hills was the Jedediah Smith expedition in 1823. The group spent some time in the hills fur trapping. They also spent some extra time in the area because Jedediah Smith was mauled by a grizzly bear and needed time to recover. In 1887, the carved stone was discovered at the base of Lookout Mountain near Spearfish by Louis Guillaume, stating, quote, "Came to the hills in 1833. 7 of us all died, but me, Ezra Kind. De la Compie, Ezra Kind, G.W. Wood, T. Brown, R. Kent, W.M. Keene, Indian Crow. Killed by Indians beyond the high hill. Got our gold, June 1834. The reverse side said, quote, got all of the gold we could carry. Our ponies all got by Indians. I have lost my gun and nothing to eat, and Indians hunting me. Whether this carved stone or story are authentic or fake, it's still an interesting story. The stone is now located in the Adams Museum in Deadwood. By 1855, the Great Overland Trails, famously known as the Oregon and California Trails, have been traveled from settlers from the east. That being said, the relations between settlers and the tribes were uneasy and fragile. General William Harney was given command of a survey detachment in Fort Laramie, Wyoming, and was ordered northeast toward the Black Hills, and then on to Fort Pierre. By this time, the Black Hills had been given to the tribes via the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. G.K. Warren, a former member of the Harney Party, was so intrigued by the Black Hills that he convinced the government to allow him to lead a party in 1857. His efforts to document and map out the region, however, were severely challenged by several bands of the Lakota Sioux. Even with these challenges, he did state in his report, a good location for a fort would be in the vicinity of Bear Butte. In 1859, the Ronalds expedition went to the Black Hills. Several soldiers found gold in Beaver Creek, on the northern slope of the hills. Reynolds decided to head into the Powder River country to separate his men from the gold. On April 9, 1868, the U.S. government signed the Second Fort Laramie Treaty with the Sioux and Cheyenne tribes. In 1874, the United States 7th Cavalry were sent into the Black Hills on an exploratory expedition, and they discovered gold in French Creek. Then in the fall of 1875, a small party of prospectors discovered gold in what they named Deadwood Gulch. In the spring of 1876, 7 mining camps were created in Deadwood Gulch: Montana City, Fountain City, Elizabethtown, Deadwood City, South Deadwood, Ingleside, and Cleveland. Then in June 1876, James Butler Hickok, or Wild Bill Hickok, as he was more famously known as, arrived in Deadwood. On June 25, 1876, Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, led by Chief Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, defeated George Armstrong Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. It was a national travesty for the United States, and it occurred just 285 miles west of Deadwood. As stated in the Annie Oakley series, in many cases throughout the West, there was no one commander of the Native Americans. Like we have in the United States Army, where one person has say over the entire army. For the Native Americans, each group of tribes was commanded by one person, but someone from the Hunkpapa band of the Lakota could not tell the Oglala band of the Lakota what to do. But that's where I was wrong. Because of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, all the bands of the Lakota and the Cheyenne tribes agreed to have Chief Sitting Bull lead them into battle. This is one of the rare cases where the Native Americans had one overall leader. On August 1st, 1876, Sol Star and Seth Bullock arrived in Deadwood. The day after the partners arrived, August 2nd, 1876, was a bloody day in Deadwood's history. James Butler Hickok, famously known as Wild Bill Hickok, was playing poker at his favorite saloon, Nuttall and Mann's Saloon No. 10, as he did most every night. The night prior, the cards were in his favor. He was playing with 4 men, and after one of the men had lost enough, he got up and left. There was a man waiting for this opportunity, as he was good and drunk, watching the famous gunslinger. He approached the table and sat down. The man's name was Jack McCall. He wasn't a great poker player, but his attention was elsewhere. Immediately, McCall began losing. Eventually, he lost it all. Afterwards, Wild Bill gave him a donation and told him to go get some grub, and Jack McCall accepted. The next night, Wild Bill wasn't able to sit at his normal seat. the seat with his back to the wall. It was taken by a 17-year-old kid named Charlie Rich. Wild Bill asked to switch seats, but Charlie refused, and Wild Bill was forced to sit with his back facing the door. Jack McCall walked into the door and was unassuming, another man coming in to have a drink. McCall proceeded to get good and drunk, and he slowly walked toward the table. Just as Charlie Rich dealt Wild Bill's 2-pair, aces and eights, McCall pulled out his double-action .45 pistol, shouted "Take that," and shot Wild Bill in the back of the head. Wild Bill died instantly. The pairs of aces and eights are known today as the dead man's hand. Wild Bill Hickok was one of the most famous gunslingers from the Old West. He had previously said in prior days that he felt that Deadwood would be his last camp, and it was. Jack McCall was tried in Deadwood, and they found him innocent of the crime, due to him stating that it was a revenge killing since Wild Bill had killed his brother. This seems to be untrue, as Jack McCall did not have a brother, but in 1876, it was damn near impossible to prove. However, since Deadwood was already an illegal town, being located in Indian Territory, they did not have any legal holding. Smartly, Jack McCall fled town and ended up in Wyoming, where he bragged about the killing and a U.S. Marshal arrested him. He was sent to Yankton, the capital of Dakota Territory, and was found guilty and hung in the spring of 1877. The legend of Seth Bullock starts upon his arrival in Deadwood. The partnership of Bullock and Starr believed that most stores in the town would cater to the more sinister side of society, such as saloons, brothels, and gambling houses. They wanted to support the miners with equipment and household goods. They started in a shrewd tent, and later bought a lot with a building, and a sign was strung up stating Starr and Bullock Hardware, from which they advertised mining equipment, furniture, wallpaper, lamps, and other hardware. After they got their hardware store up and running, they immediately recognized that Deadwood needed law and order. At the time, Deadwood held miner meetings to discuss laws, trials, etc. It was fairly common for these mining towns to sort of be self-governed, since they were illegal to begin with. However, the miners rarely accomplished anything that held weight, and they rarely met, so taking care of day-to-day responsibilities became impossible. On August 14, 1876, the miners voted to establish a 5-member committee known as the Board of Health and Street Commissioners. Their tasks included removing obstructions from streets, watching for fires, and building a pest house. A pest house was essentially a quarantine house for those infected by smallpox. The committee was to take control of law and order in Deadwood. If they were to meet any resistance, they would be supported by the miners, by guns, if necessary. Among the 5 commissioners was Seth Bullock. It's a bit surprising that he was elected when you think about how he arrived in Deadwood just 13 days prior, but it shows a lot about who Seth Bullock was at the time. First off, he had a little bit of fame. The miners had a large number of Montana men who trusted Bullock. Second, he wanted the job, and he hoped to bring law and order to the mining camp. There seemed to be 3 big reasons why he wanted this. He wanted legitimate business to be able to succeed. Second, he wanted to get into local politics and establish himself as the leader of the community. This was his first big step in doing that. And third, the sooner he made the town safe, the sooner he could send for his family. There was a growing worry from the smallpox epidemic that was spreading throughout the mining town, and it seemed to be the committee's top priority. The solution to the outbreak was a pest house. The biggest problem was finding where to put it. Obviously, no one wanted the pest house in their town. The first place selected was Elizabethtown, then about a mile out of town on Spearfish Road, but Indian raids ruined that plan. Next up was near the town cemetery near South Deadwood, but the residents protested, and when the committee began to build, the residents began to cut away at the wooden foundation. But the committee stood firm and would defend it with force if necessary. Calmer heads prevailed, however. The residents compromised to help reconstruct the pest house, pay for damages, and move it to Spruce Gulch, that was south of Deadwood. When the pest house was completed, there was just 2 cases in the pest house, as a vaccine had arrived from Sidney, Nebraska. All that hard work and stressing for nothing. Sunday, August 20th, 1876, was another bloody day in Deadwood. First, more than 100 Native Americans attacked the Montana herd of horses on Centennial Prairie and made off with a large number of horses. With it being Sunday, Deadwood was alive with miners and prospectors who came into town to resupply and have a time in town. But with the word of the Indian attack, they wanted revenge. Armed riders, liquored up, soon raced out of town to chase down the Indians and recover the stolen horses. Seth Bullock does not seem to have been a part of the posse of these men. That being said, he had to deal with the aftermath. Unfortunately, death haunted that day. At least 4 Deadwood residents lost their lives. A body was found on the road to nearby Crook City. The man's name was Henry Weston Preacher Smith. He had planned to give a Sunday service when he was killed on the road. Although historians argue on whether it was Indians or road agents who killed him, it seems most likely that Indians did the deed when looking at the events that followed. The 3 other men were definitely killed by Indians. 2 of them had entered in the pursuit. When the bodies were returned to Deadwood, the Board of Health made plans to bury those who did not have connections to the town, essentially family or friends. This included Henry Weston Preacher Smith. A bit about Smith. He came to the Black Hills for the gold rush, like most men did, but when he saw an absence of Christianity in town, his beliefs compelled him to spend each Sunday standing on a box, spreading the Word of God. Smith was regarded as an honest and conscientious man. The Board of Health drew sticks to see who would conduct a proper religious ceremony for Smith's burial. Bullock pulled the short stick. He never met Mr. Smith, and he was not an overly religious man. However, a deacon from the Congregational Church had shown up and performed the service. Bullock did, however, write and send a letter of condolence to a friend of Mr. Smith's in Louisville, Kentucky. He also sent Smith's Bible to his sister in Memphis, Tennessee. Second, legend says that the Native Americans also took a hit, as a local man that went by the name Texas Jack beheaded an Indian and raced it through town. To profit from his prize, he sold locks of hair, and this action forced the Board of Health to seize the head. They paid Texas Jack his bounty and buried the head. Third, the mining camp's first marshal, Isaac Brown, who was elected on the 5th of August, 1876, served just a few weeks, when on the 20th of August, the marshal, along with Reverend Smith, Charles Mason, and Charles Holland, traveled between Crook City and Deadwood, when they were ambushed and killed by Sioux Indians. Just 2 days later, another man in town was killed, and Bullock oversaw the trial. A bartender named Harry Sam Young from Nuttall and Man's Saloon No. 10 had been threatened by a man named Sam Hartman, or Laughing Sam. He was a man of, quote, low repute. And on August 22nd, a man walked in wearing a distinctive overcoat that was favored by Laughing Sam. Henry Young believed at the time for Laughing Sam to make good on his threats. But Henry Young wasn't going to give him the chance. He grabbed for his gun and shot the man, killing him. The man he killed was his best friend, Meyer Baum, known as Bummer Dan. He was trying to play a trick on his friend, but the prank had a bloody end. Realizing his mistake, Young immediately turned himself over to the Board of Health. He claimed the shooting was accidental, and the jury found him not guilty. Due to the poor lighting in the saloon, the distinctive coat that Laughing Sam usually wore, and Bummer Dan being Young's best friend. The jury couldn't find him guilty of murder and ruled it accidental. Deadwood obviously needed more law and order. The miners and the Board of Health met and agreed to form a city government and have elections set for the 11th of September, 1876. They asked residents to vote for or against the organization. If voted yes, they wanted them to vote for city officials. This included councilmen and a marshal. The results came in, and it was 1,082 in favor of city government and 57 against. Surprisingly, Bullock chose not to run for any position, not even for the position of marshal. However, Solstar ran for the council and was one of 4 men elected. Bullock did not run for the position of marshal, and the man that was put into place after the murder of Isaac Brown retained the position. The man's name was Con Stapleton. Complete random side note. This is roughly around the time when Wyatt and Morgan Earp arrived at Deadwood. Remember, at this time, the famous shootout at the OK Corral wouldn't happen for another 5 years. But Wyatt Earp was a known lawman, but not as well known as he will be later when he becomes a legend. I couldn't find much concrete evidence of Wyatt and Morgan's actions in Deadwood, but there seem to be 2 popular beliefs. First, according to Bullock's son, the Earps tried to muscle their way into law enforcement and talked with Seth Bullock, who proceeded to tell them that they were not needed. Remember, Bullock could outstare an angry cobra and had a stern personality. The Earps realized that this wasn't the place for them. Second, they came to Deadwood to try and buy a claim and prospect for gold, only to find out that the land was essentially claimed out, meaning there was no land left. Regardless of which story is true, if any of them are, Morgan Earp decided to leave town and head back to Dodge City before winter set in, as Wyatt Earp decided to stay in town and try to mind the miners at the poker table, and joined his brother in Dodge City the following spring. Then in October of 1876, Bullock left Deadwood to visit his wife and child in Michigan, and they decided to make a family just a little bit bigger. His second daughter, Florence, was born in October of 1877. On his visit to Michigan, Bullock corresponded with Governor John L. Pennington of Dakota Territory. Pennington and Bullock got to know one another, and the governor learned of Bullock's political ambitions. In February 1877, Congress imposed a treaty on the Indians, removing them from the Great Sioux Reservation, creating 3 counties: Lawrence, Pennington, and Custer. This is exactly what Bullock wanted. This new legislation allowed for new appointments of each county. Pennington had a job to do. He was to appoint the new positions of the 3 counties. Pennington and Bullock had developed a friendship, and after a stop in Yankton, Bullock picked up executive documents and the appointments for the new counties. Pennington made his appointments in March 1877, and Seth Bullock was appointed sheriff of Lawrence County. Many of the other appointments were men from Yankton, which was the capital of Dakota Territory. This led many residents from Deadwood to start denouncing the appointments, calling the men appointed carpetbaggers, and Bullock was included in these comments. He had been gone for 5 months at the time, and had only spent a little over 2 months in Deadwood. Regardless of these comments, Bullock was excited about becoming sheriff. Most of Deadwood's officials resigned their position upon the appointments coming in, but there was one position where the man wouldn't resign: Con Stapleton. Here's a bit about Mr. Stapleton. Con Stapleton was an Irish immigrant who was living in Montana when word of the gold strike came from Deadwood. He arrived in the spring of 1876. He was one of the men who played cards with Wild Bill Hickok. One interesting event that took place in the time Stapleton was sheriff of Deadwood was on the 14th of January, 1877. Con Stapleton, David Lunt, and a few other men were standing at Al Chapman's saloon. Then a man named Tom Smith came into the saloon waving his pistol in the air while shouting threats. He then pointed the gun at the crowd and stated, "Anyone who moves gets shot." The marshal, Con Stapleton, attempted to disarm him. Just then the gun went off, just missing Stapleton but striking David Lunt in the forehead. Lunt dropped to the ground. Suddenly, he stands up, brushes himself off, and continued about his day. That would have been a hell of a sight to see. Stapleton then arrested Smith and was tried for shooting at an officer of the law. Although he was found guilty, he was released and made his way to San Francisco. David Lunt would live his life like nothing happened. The only difference was that he had a hole in his forehead. However, on the 22nd of March, 1877, he started complaining about a headache. That night, he died. 67 days after being shot, the bullet finally killed him. After Lunt's death, Tom Smith was rearrested and sent to Yankton to stand trial. When Seth Bullock was appointed sheriff, although Stapleton tried, Bullock stood firm on his appointment. in Stapleton followed many of the town's citizens to a new gold strike in Leadville, Colorado. 8 months later, he reportedly died on the 10th of September, 1879. He was 31 years old. Besides having to deal with Con Stapleton, these were some of Bullock's first actions as sheriff. He needed to establish and organize an office. He located it in the Star and Bullock hardware store because the business had a fireproof storeroom that would function well as a jail. It also allowed him to work as sheriff, but also be there for his hardware store. Next, he needed to select deputies. He hired as many as 8 deputies, with most living at other locations outside of Deadwood, including Crook City and Central City. Lastly, he appointed night watchmen that would make nightly rounds looking for fire hazards or any suspicious fires. Being a sheriff in a frontier gold camp came with a routine to-do list, which includes investigating claims of theft, embezzlement, and burglary. In one event, he broke up a, quote, good-sized gang of outlaws who had been robbing mining claims in stores. Bullock allowed most of the disagreements in the town to work themselves out. Deadwood had 60 saloons, and as you can imagine, drunken arguments were common, and Bullock very rarely arrested anyone for disorderly conduct. He would break up fights, however. There are many instances to where 2 men would start to rumble, and a crowd would form. Bullock would continually step in and shackle the wrists and ankles of the men. I think this is a good place to end episode 1 of our deep dive into the life of Seth Bullock. We still have plenty more to cover. Next week, we will be covering more of his actions as lawman, handle more elections, natural disasters, and then begin looking into his entrepreneurial career. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please email me with comments, questions, concerns, and I will try my best to get back to you. You can email me at wildwestdeepdives@gmail.com. We will see you all next week. When in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.